Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another video. And today I have someone who I hope needs no introduction to you, and that is my good friend and fellow astrology colleague, Alicia Yusuf. So Alicia makes one water leg of our water trio, and I've invited her here today to discuss her article in Australia's WellBeing Astrology Guide. So Alicia's written all about Saturn and Pisces, which of course is some astrology we're all going to be talking about a lot in the upcoming months. So Alicia, share with everyone what your thoughts are on Saturn in Pisces.
Thanks, Cass. Nice to be here chatting with you, and hello to your audience. Look, it's such an interesting one, Saturn in Pisces, isn't it? It's like the master of the tangible Saturn in the intangible waters of Pisces. It's like they seem like opposite ends of the scale there. How do you build solidity in a place that's constantly shifting, constantly
Yeah.
moving? And I think the way to bring the two of them together, the way I think about it is the holy cup or the holy grail, that idea of Saturn can be that special structure that you can pour the mystical waters of Pisces into and hold them in place.
Mm.
So, even if we think about like cut glass or crystal, which is actually made with lead, so it's a very Saturnian thing. It's like, okay, how can you build this beautiful set of disciplined structures under Saturn in which you can anchor those imaginative, creative, or mystical energies of Pisces in your world? So, some of the ways that this could happen is really devotional practices, disciplined devotional practices, whether that's regular mindfulness, whether that's prayer and ritual for you, or it might be something more active like yoga, but the idea is how can you use that as a gateway towards the oneness of Pisces? Um, yeah, so that's some of my thoughts. Where are you at with it all? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so many thoughts. I guess it's really interesting because you can, but you also have to take into consideration what's been happening in Pisces for the last little
Yeah.
while, and when we really look at the macro, also since 2011 that Neptune first
Mm-hmm.
went in there. So
Yeah.
I feel like at least in the more immediate past with Jupiter and Pisces, so how can you maybe solidify some of the opportunities that have come through?
Yeah.
How can you maybe tighten the ship a little bit if you have
Mm,
let energy leak? How can you make good on those opportunities that have been brought forward? And, they may be, real sort of, those Jupiter opportunities, but it also might have things to do with what is meaningful in your life from that sort of watery emotional perspective. And so, maybe it's like putting a little bit of a container around some of the leakage around things. And just sort of solidifying, making good on an opportunity in some ways, I think is a big part of that. Because the roads have opened, and now it's like, okay, now they've become a little bit so, how you like when they re-bitumen or asphalt for the US listeners, when they
mm,
like pave the road, it's to make it more smooth and structured and what have you. So it's like, doing that in the Pisces area of your life, I think.
mm,
Yeah, it's kind of like interesting when there's such a contradiction rather, between what Saturn brings to the table and what Jupiter
mm.
wants to bring, and maybe like thinking about a little bit when Jupiter was in Sagittarius and some of the themes that came up there. And then, obviously Saturn is in a square position to that. And how, at least from a collective standpoint, how did some of the
Mm,
issues of Jupiter and Sag and then Jupiter and Pisces, and Saturn and Pisces, where do we need to, I don't know, tighten the ship? It's probably one analogy that I keep coming back to when I'm thinking about this for my clients
yep.
and teachings and things like that, and
Yeah.
we've had such a tough time, everyone, the last few years. So it's sort of a little bit like, okay, I may be a little bit compassionate out in some areas, or maybe I'm just need to kind of just keep my energy tight, because Pisces really leaks it out, right?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's where, this analogy of the cup really fits in so many ways. Because another one is, exactly what you're saying, committing to our emotional health, because
Yeah.
so many of us have been through so much upheaval, really, since Saturn moved into its own signs, you know, through Capricorn 2018 through to 2020 and then into Aquarius as well. So there's been a lot of that Saturnian hard taskmaster energy, or as you sow so you'll reap. So there have been a lot of hard lessons in place, and I
Yeah.
think this is where, as Saturn moves into Pisces, we begin to feel again. It's less about having our nose to the grindstone or being so logical about things. It's more about, okay, how am I going to come back to that sense of, what am I doing in my emotional world? What do the rules look like here? For those of you that scuba dive or sail or anything like that, the rules of the water are very, very different to the rules of the land. And I think this is going to be a shift in focus of, okay, well, what does it look like when we're delving into those more emotive, those more sensitive, those more felt worlds? And when we are able to make a commitment to our emotional health, to see it as a holistic part of all of our health, it helps us be well in a whole new way. So, like what you were talking about, that idea of compassion fatigue, so many people have been overgiving or overdoing with emotionally in the last few years. So this might be a chance to kind of tighten it back in, or Saturn reap the consequences if you don't. So you may really feel that stretch of, I've given too much for too long and there's nothing else left in the tank. So how am I going to fill my own cup
Yeah.
instead of constantly filling others?
Mm.
Because I think that's where Pisces can be that as well. It can be the generosity of Jupiter is boundless in these waters. So, but realistically, that's great for the universe. But we're human beings. We can't be God, goddess, divine. It's supposed to flow through us, not come from us. So there's
Yeah.
that idea of, how can you be realistic around topics like compassion, forgiveness, and understanding? I mean, I think we had in our pre-chat, you mentioned that idea that you can have all the compassion in the world for somebody in a relationship. It doesn't mean you have to be always showing up or not putting boundaries in place if their behavior is harmful or hurtful. So I think
Yeah.
another thing I'd add in around this energy too, is what are the consequences of overdoing emotions and compassion?
Yeah, I think of the result of the Jupiter Neptune configurations that we had earlier this year, where so much has, when it comes to boundaries or definitions, rules, issues of faith and morality, and what's fair and just, all of those kind of Jupiterian type of themes have just been anything goes. And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, how Saturn might help us sort of redefine things, which may be a test of faith in some respects as well, and having to really maybe choose your cause in a way, or define your cause, and getting a little bit more, I guess, Brene Brown about it, like getting that kind of spine, but a softer front, and not being that kind of pushover or a doormat type of energy, with all compassion. It's like, compassion without structure is really virtue signaling, really. Like, what are you actually going to do?
Yeah.
Rather than just shouting it from the rooftops of how, much compassion you have for a thing or what have you. Well, are you backing that up with a real result or a real structure to help you get to, or help that other person, organization, what have you, to get from one point to the next? So it's a bit of a challenge, and I think sitting with the contradiction of that is going
Yeah.
to be an interesting cycle. a side note, I know when, we did a water trio podcast on secondary progressions recently, didn't we? But it was on the
Yes.
moon.
Mm.
And just when you said about having Saturn go through two of its signs, this is something really interesting. It's a kind of a sidebar, but I think it can relate, where I notice with people who have born a Capricorn, and then when they progress, so they'll progress through Aquarius, and then once they hit Pisces, it's almost like they have a crisis. I've seen it
Yeah,
so
totally.
often because they've been Saturn their whole life. And then, oh my God, I'm in this like Jupiterian, primordial, oceanic,
Yeah.
undefined identity, right? And so collectively, we've been having our, very Saturn and, Capricorn and
Mm.
Aquarius experience. And now we're like sort of progressing into the Pisces. And it might be a little bit, WTF.
Yeah.
This is very different. So, I think just holding a little bit of, energy for it to be a little bit confusing as well. It might take,
Yeah.
it's like sea legs, trying to
Yeah, totally. Totally.
trying to find
Yeah.
that tangibility or stability when the tides are choppy, So,
Especially for much of that 2023 period too, which is when Saturn will be, sitting around that 0 through 5 degrees of Pisces. It will be, okay, I'm just trying to kind of work my way through these waters, because Saturn enters early March. I think it's the 7th, 8th
7th,
of
I think.
March. Yeah.
March is like
So
the month of
I know.
2023.
Pluto and Aquarius is a whole nother story.
Oh
But
dear, I know.
yeah, I think it's what I've noticed previously in these kind of cycles is how the peace movements come to the fore. When I was doing
Mm,
the research for this article, it was really interesting to see how, it was really around the make love not war of the 60s. We had Saturn in Pisces. When Nelson Mandela took over in South Africa,
yeah.
in 97, that was Saturn in Pisces, and he had that amazing forgiveness and reconciliation process that he did alongside with Nelson Mandela, Archbishop Tutu, Desmond Tutu. So yeah, the amazing possibilities for that could be happening. And even Mahatma Gandhi's idea of peaceful protest that was born, it didn't actually start in that time, but his solidifying the idea of it came about under a Saturn in Pisces as well. So it'd be interesting to see, considering how inflamed the world is in so many
Mm.
ways right now.
I was just
Um,
trying to get an image that totally depicted what you were saying before. I only
oh,
found it
okay.
before we got on the call, but yeah, leave it for another time. But it was basically like like a Buddhist, like kind of like
Mm,
karate kicking a policeman's like shield. And I was like, oh,
okay.
it's just like that, authority of Saturn, and then the spiritual kind of warrior in, a
Mm,
like a Buddhist monk. Yeah, I was like, wow, if that
yeah.
was the Saturn Pisces in an image. So yeah,
Yeah.
and that's sort of what those people you were mentioning really brought to their eras, when
Mm,
Jupiter's been in, Saturn's been in Pisces in the past. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see kind of what rises up out of this in terms of, pushback on the Saturn years we've all been through.
yeah.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, I'm here too. And also the Neptune in Pisces piece as well. I feel like Saturn's going to be bringing the consequences for where we've been a bit too loosey goosey with Neptune in Pisces. And, I think Netflix was born under Neptune in Pisces. So, that idea of Netflix and chill, or the escapism that has been
Mm,
really amplified with Neptune in Pisces, Saturn's going to come along and go, right, have you actually managed to, you've imprisoned yourself in your escape hatch? How are you going to get out
interesting.
of that now?
Yeah. Also, too, just the rise of the weird since
Mm,
Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, and Instagram, I think, is a very Neptune and Pisces
Okay.
transit, give or take. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there sometimes can be lag between when a platform is launched and when it gains traction. So I can't recall that like totally, but
Mm.
it's almost, you know, just to get the point, Cass.
The glamour of Neptune. Is
Yeah,
that
but
what
I
you're
mean, it's
saying?
also like I'm wondering, like, you know, when it comes to alternative modalities, which astrology is one,
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm.
restrictions or limitations may be imposed on us. You know, we've had a big moment in the sun, and how might that change and shift in the era of, you know, censorship and what have you. And of course, you know, combining, you know, the Pluto in Aquarius piece as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
brace yourselves, my friends.
Good times. Good times.
I know, right? So, speaking of all things 2023, you do have a workshop coming up this weekend, right?
I do
I
on
hope to
Sunday
get this
morning.
out soon so you can
Okay.
we can promote it for you. So your website is aliciayusuf.com. Is that correct?
It is. Yep.
Yeah. And you can sign up for Alicia's end of year, well, end of year, but end of year into next year. Look at 2023. I'm also doing the same thing. I usually reserve mine for that, you know, in between Christmas, New Year period where we, you know, all the celebrations are done and we can start to hone our focus on 2023. So I'll put the links, all that below, as well as how you can score a copy of this magazine. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, it's available in Australia. You can get it digitally if you're international. And yeah, it's so great to have you. And you're like some of your best work, this article. I just so
Oh,
thoroughly,
thanks, Cass.
it was beautiful. Of course, Pisces.
I love Pisces. I love Pisces. That's
Oh,
where my
yeah.
Jupiter is. So I was
Yeah,
pulling on that.
oh, beautiful. Yeah. I really love that
Yeah,
sort of healing and optimistic approach you brought to like how you can, you know, really work with this in a constructive way to be helpful.
cool. It was my pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in. And as I said, I'll pop all the links below and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Thanks for joining me, Alicia.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone.